Hello everyone, thank you for joining us here today. My name is Rabia Begum. I am a student, artist and climate justice activist. I work as a board member with Manchester Climate Change Youth Board. I'm also a part of the Manchester Art Gallery Climate Justice Group. And I'll hand it over to Emma.
Yes, so hi, I'm Emma. I'm the other chair of the conversation today. I'm a climate justice and youth voice activist. So I don't know if you've seen the Youth Strike for Climate that happened in Manchester, obviously pre-pandemic, but I helped coordinate those as well as being the youth MP for Bury. So basically it helps to ensure that youth voice is included in decisions made about young people on both a local level in my town of Bury, but then on a national level as well within the UK. Do you want to introduce what the panel's about, Rabia?
Yep, so this is Stop Screwing Up Our Future, and this is really important as we want to bring in intergenerational voices, not just young voices, within the climate movement, and we want to see how much environmental progress has been made and how those of future generations will view us. The climate crisis, we notice it's deeply and deepeningly inequality and with rising authoritarianism. We want to make sure that we're passing on the world to the next generation with a better world for them to live in. And I will now hand over to Emma.
And obviously with the theme of Ripples of Hope, we've got some amazing change makers with us today who have definitely given me and Rabia hope, which is why I wanted them to be on the panel today. So I'll start off from the right. We've got Phoebe Hanson, who's a climate and social justice activist. Then we've got Judy, who is a revolutionary socialist since she was 16. And then virtually as well, we've got María, Alejandra, Aguilar, who is an environmental lawyer from Colombia, and Evelyn, Acham, who is a global choice archangel and passionate climate justice activist from Uganda. So to develop on those introductions again, because I definitely can't do them justice on my own. Phoebe, do you want to introduce yourself in a bit more detail?
Yeah, thank you. So, as Emma said, I'm Phoebe Hanson. I'm a climate and social justice activist. I also sit on Manchester's Climate Change Youth Board with Rabia. I'm also the Chief Operating Officer of Force of Nature, which is a youth-led non-profit mobilising mindsets for climate action. We work with young people, educators, business leaders all over the world.
Judy, do you want to introduce yourself in a bit more detail?
Yes, as Emma said, I've been a revolutionary socialist all my adult life. I've campaigned on lots of issues, but since about 2006, I've realised that climate change is by far the main threat that humanity faces, one which there's no way we can avoid it. Like, you know, we've been lucky enough to avoid nuclear war so far, but climate change is inexorable. It's going to happen unless we stop it. So that's what my concern is today.
Thank you. María, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much for the invitation, firstly. As you mentioned, I'm an environmental lawyer. I work for the promotion of human rights and environmental rights. I'm an associate lawyer at the Colombian NGO Ambiente y Sociedad and gender consultant to the United Nations Climate Technology Network and Center as part of their Youth Knowledge Exchange program. And of course, I'm an Arctic Angel, part of Global Choices.
Thank you. And Evelyn?
Thank you so much. As you introduced me, my name is Evelyn Acham. I'm from Kampala, Uganda. I'm a climate justice activist I work as national coordinator for the Rising Movement here in Uganda. I'm an Arctic Angel with Global Choices, and I'm a member of Fridays for Future.
Amazing. So as you can see, we've got an incredible panelist with us. So we're going to start the conversation. We've got a VT from Divya, who is a global choice archangel from India. So do you want to play that, VT?
Hi, my name is Divya and I am an Arctic Angel from India. Arctic Angels is a youth-led intergenerational and international network founded and supported by Global Choices. From the Arctic to the Antarctic, we, the Arctic Angels, are collaborating to drive action on the polar ice crisis. I was 22 years old when I saw snow and ice for the first time in my life. when I went on an expedition to Antarctica. Did you know the Antarctic continent contains 91% of all ice in the world and 86% of all the fresh water that occurs in the form of ice? But polar ice, and especially the Arctic ice, is now melting at an unprecedented rate. The melting Greenland ice sheets and the loss of Antarctic ice is going to cause sea levels to rise globally. We are already experiencing disruptions in our monsoons and climate patterns from the effects of Arctic warming. Effectively, we are losing our Earth's thermostats. With a coastline of over 7,500 kilometers, the Indian Peninsula is one of the first regions to be impacted by immediate sea level rise. Young people in India and all over the world are working together to be informed, invested, and intent on building a hopeful future. Now is the time for us to take ripple actions that will affect centuries to come. Together, we can create intergenerational networks to tackle climate change and put collective action to pressure policymakers and opportunities like this festival to speak out. The Arctic is predicted to become ice-free in the summers before the year 2050. Ice is on the edge of extinction and is the global SOS for emission reduction. We have lost 28 trillion tons of ice globally in less than 30 years, yet there are still plans to break a transpolar shipping Suez Canal across the North Pole. Exploitation as usual with deep seabed mining, nuclear testing, and oil and gas is still on the cards in the last pristine biome. Global Choices is calling for a 10-year moratorium on these activities to protect the Central Arctic Ocean ice shield. This is an area beyond national jurisdiction and effectively belongs to all of us as global citizens. We have a responsibility to all for its protection. If we want to pass on a better world to our children, we need to stop leaving the job of cleaning up our planet to someone else. We need to stop ice melting in the polar regions by redoubling efforts to reduce emissions through industry interventions and enacting policies that will drive eco-friendly consumer behavior. We need to remind ourselves that the planet is our home. The ice belongs to each and every one of us and needs our protection. We can't plant ice once it's gone.
I think that was some really interesting points made by Divya, so thank you, Divya, for that. And just adding to the community aspect from that, I'm going to kick off with a round of questions to the panellists. So starting with María, I'd like to ask you, what role does community play in helping us protect the future?
Sorry, thank you for that very relevant question. I think communities are leading change. Communities are the foundation of societies. We evolved as a species because we could form groups to cooperate. So I think that the deep transformative changes that our society needs to face the ongoing climate crisis start from the very foundation, from strengthening local participation and involvement. We see that the front lines in combating the climate crisis are communities, from indigenous local communities in the Amazon or Arctic to, for example, the Fridays for Future movement that became a global community. So I also believe that our capacity to adapt to the climate crisis and fight against the climate crisis is directly proportional to the strength of our communities. So communities play a key role, and we should all work to keep strengthening resilience in communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, María. And I'll pass on to you, Emma.
Yes, so this question is going to be for Judy, but just to build on it a bit. Earlier, if anybody was here at the opening, we had Sir Tim Smith, who is one of the co-founders of the Eden Project, come and speak. And he spoke a lot about the barriers we're currently facing with taking climate action. So some of them are things like political barriers. And if a world leader was to go, oh, I made this decision to benefit future generations, a lot of people would go, oh, that's not good enough, we need to benefit now. And so there's always these sort of fundamental barriers we're facing, where it's not a lack of initiatives that are limiting us from taking climate action, but more social barriers and political barriers that we've created. And so, Judy, my question to you is, what barriers are we currently facing that are leading us to screwing up the future? And what action do you think needs to be taken?
Yes, well, I think the answer to this is distressingly simple, really. It's the system that we live under, the social and economic system, which is capitalism. And as you all know, this is based on production for profit and not for human need. And in capitalism, the fossil fuel companies are a really key component. They've been integral to the development of capitalism ever since the development of steam. And those companies are not going to stop digging up coal and drilling for oil in time to save the planet. They're not going to do that of their own accord, because their long-term interests as human beings, which we all share, those are unfortunately overshadowed by the interest in short-term profit, especially those at the top who have the power. And unfortunately, I would say our government is also part of the barrier. It's another barrier, if you like, because they don't really represent all of us and our overwhelming need to deal with the climate crisis. They're talking a bit big now. I believe Boris Johnson is in America today. He's addressing the UN. And of course, our government is hosting the climate talks in Glasgow in November. And they are going to be boasting about how much they're achieving and asking other countries for bigger, more ambition to tackle the crisis. However, actions speak louder than words, unfortunately. And Boris Johnson and his government, their actions are all contrary to what we need to do. For example, continuing to subsidise the fossil fuel industries, and they haven't even stopped allowing new exploration for oil and gas and even coal. Coal in Cumbria is an issue at the moment, and there's a new oil field which they want to allow to go ahead off Shetland, and other examples as well. And another example, I'm afraid, is the only really substantial green initiative, which could have been a big part of their Build Back Better, so-called, that's been abolished. They cancelled it, and that was the Green Homes Grant. So their actions speak louder than words. It's up to us. So my second main barrier is the feelings of powerlessness that we have as individuals. I mean, you can go vegetarian, and that's probably a good idea, and so on. But we don't feel it's enough, and it isn't. But if we get together collectively, we can be strong. I can even give you an example from my own experience where we did win, hopefully forever, and that is on fracking in this country. It never got established because although the government bent over backwards to allow it to happen, Lancashire County Council voted to ban it, but the government overruled them. But a protest and a camp at the site went on for years with the support of all of us in Manchester and elsewhere, and eventually we did win. So that's a very good example of what we can achieve. How do we do it? I think you can write to your MP and so on, but I think radical action is necessary. I think that Extinction Rebellion and other organisations give us a very good example of what you can do with non-violent direct action. But my very favourite form of action, which I think we have to have in order to win, is mass action, whether that's the youth climate strikes, which are coming back on the street, in which Emma and others are involved next Friday, and I hope you'll all be there to support them, and also strikes in workplaces, which we hope, especially in November at COP26, those will happen as well. That's what we need to defeat the government here and all around the world and save the planet.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Judy. There were some really great barriers that you mentioned there, and also actions, and in terms of immediate action for us to take. Next Friday, as you mentioned, there's the youth strike here in St. Peter's Square at 12 p.m. So if you are interested, I'd definitely say to go to that. So moving on to Evelyn for my next question. So when we talk about the climate emergency, when we talk about climate crisis, many of us think about surviving and living. So in context to that, what does it mean to live in this climate emergency? And then following on from this question, what does it mean to survive in a climate emergency?
Thank you so much. I live in Kampala, Uganda. People are dying in devastating floods as a result of the climate crisis. People are losing their homes and livelihoods. Infrastructure like schools are being destroyed, and this is leaving students out of school and putting certain groups of people at a risk, like the girls who have to drop out of school and be given away in exchange for bride price as a result of looking for a way of survival by families. So the climate crisis is a reality in our community. We are experiencing devastating floods. We are experiencing prolonged droughts that are drying up people's crops, drying up water sources, and this is forcing women to walk long distances in search for water and food to be able to feed their families, because all the water sources around have dried up. So they have to walk long distances as a way of supporting their families to survive. The climate crisis in my community is real. People are dying. People are actually suffering. People are left in pain and agony. They're left with nothing to eat or to drink. They're left suffering. And of course, I'm among the survivors, and I feel lucky to be a survivor. But again, how about the people who are at a risk? How about the people who are so vulnerable, like the poor people? Yeah, some of their family members have died from the climate crisis. Their homes have been washed away, and they are scared every time they see heavy rains, every time they see flooding. They are worried. They are scared of dying. They are scared of losing their property. And again, they don't have hope of getting back this property. Yeah, but this is why we, the survivors, have to stand up and speak up for the people who are suffering, have to speak up for the people who are still at a risk of dying from this crisis. And I want to tell the people out there that in Africa, the climate crisis is already real and it's catastrophic. The present is already so scary for us, and the future is still so scary for us. And this is why, as an African woman who has never experienced snow, I am an Arctic angel. And this is because being an Arctic angel does not only mean that you must be from the global north or you must be living in the Arctic, but we have to know that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. It affects everyone. Some of the impacts were already being experienced so heavily in Africa. Yeah, and so many people are not aware that actually the Arctic is responsible for reducing the temperatures on our planet. Yeah, so this is why we are experiencing very high temperatures in Africa, and yet this is not resulting from Africa, it's resulting from the Arctic. So this is why I am an Arctic angel, because once the ice is gone, like we had Divya say that once the ice is gone, it's gone. We cannot plant ice.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I think just first of all, thank you, Evelyn, for sharing those experiences. Here in Manchester, we have yet to experience that devastating impacts on the women going through, and all yourselves. It's scary to hear, but it's a reality, and it's soon to be hopefully not a reality that we all experience, but it's important that we do work collectively and share and hear these experiences and stories that are so very real. So thank you for sharing that, Evelyn. Moving on to Emma. Yeah.
I was just going to add to that as well. I think it sort of shows a certain level of privilege that we have here in the UK, where we're not experiencing things like that, and it isn't an imminent threat to our safety from flooding, although we're beginning to experience it with the really inconsistent weather patterns and the increase in heat. But I think the danger is that the most privileged countries are the ones who are probably most accountable for this and the ones who are putting the most money into it. And so we have a role to ensure that that privilege doesn't somehow make us naive to the facts that we are insecure to it too. And thank you so much for sharing that. And sort of going on from that, this question came about because I recently read a book called The Good Ancestor, which if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend. But it changed my outlook on it, because we're living in an increasingly short-term society where we can get everything so instantly, and it's easy to think that the actions we have now won't affect future generations. And if you look at a lot of indigenous tribes, they look at the earth as something that they're borrowing rather than something they've got to utilise. And that shift in mindset was really, really interesting to read about, so I'd highly recommend it. But this question sort of came from that, which is for you, Phoebe, of how do you think the people of the future will remember us, and how would you like them to remember us?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I'd like to just echo Evelyn's point that it's not just about future generations. Like, frontline communities across the world today are experiencing climate change and the effects of it firsthand now. So although we need to think about the future that our future generations are inheriting, we have to think about those folks now that are on those frontline communities. I would hope that we would be remembered for taking radical action, for that mass collective action like you mentioned, Judy, corporates really reflecting on the way they've been behaving and operating and changing those broken systems that we know all too well. That's what I hope. What I fear might happen, speaking from the perspective of a young person, is that young people all over the world will become the lost generation that couldn't live their lives safe and free from worry, with something that's completely avoidable. We're facing a mental health crisis at the minute. We've found that 70% of young people in the UK are experiencing eco-anxiety, which is an incredibly normal response to a crisis. It would be even more strange if your house was on fire and you didn't run out screaming and crying. So it's a very healthy response, and the issue that we're facing is that decision makers, corporate leaders, politicians, they're not experiencing that eco-anxiety. They don't see this sense of urgency. They see climate change as a future issue. They're not thinking about our frontline communities that are already experiencing the effects of climate change now. And young people are pottering around through their day-to-day life. We're doing protests, we're doing all we can, but it's so difficult to not feel powerless, as you said, Judy. There's only so much that we can do without the people who are in those historic decision-making seats allow us into those decision-making rooms and hear our lived experience, hear our perspectives, and actually listen to the future that we want to create. And just create a future where everybody is safe, everybody is happy, and we are free from worry every day. So that's what I hope will happen and what I fear might happen without that radical change.
Thank you very much for that, and I completely echo that. But bringing it back to the angle of hope as the festival is around, I'd say that over the past few years, there's definitely been an increase in conversation around the climate crisis, because I remember when I started the youth strikes back in 2019, it was on the news every once in a while, but it definitely wasn't as prominent as it is now, and the fact that it's got a whole day at this festival just goes to show that. And we've got a long way to go, obviously, with translating that shift in mindset and that increasing awareness into action that is protecting people like you, Evelyn, in Africa. But I think, in a sense, there is that hope. So I'm hoping that we're down that right route that you want, where people of the future will remember us as a generation that saw the danger. And although we may have dragged our feet for a little while, if we have, that we did start to take action, and hopefully we're going to see that appear. Rabia, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you for that, Phoebe. And just to finish off in terms of questions from the panellists, María, I'd just like to end with this question. So what gives you hope for future generations from what's being done right now? So is there any in particular, like, people or organizations, things that might inspire you, or even practices, anything that gives you hope? We'd love to kind of round round up on that. Yeah.
I think seeing beautiful examples of collective action, intersectionality and inclusiveness, such as Arctic Angels, it represents very well what's going on with the environmental and climate movement, because we come from very different countries, different age groups and diverse backgrounds, but in diversity we do find a common objective, or will and passion to advocate for the protection of our global commons, raise awareness about the ice crisis, and raise our voices for climate justice. I want to mention a very important initiative, which is calling for the 10-year moratorium. This is basically an initiative to protect the Central Arctic Ocean ice shield from destructive exploitation. It's just very crucial. As Eve mentioned, we cannot plant ice. So I think seeing this diversity of groups and networks arising and doing something is what, gives me hope, seeing that there are people out there committed to make change.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to add to that on intersectionality and just bringing it back to women. We know that women within STEM are underrepresented, and right now we have this conversation here today, and we're all female, a part of this panel, which I just wanted to highlight. Yeah, and round of applause. Yeah. And hopefully we can continue to engage and work with more women within the climate movement, as I know that's on one of the main sustainability goals. Yeah.
I was just going to say as well, we're actually running a bit ahead of schedule, which was unexpected. So I love this question we had about what gives people hope. So we open up to the rest of the panel, because I'd love to hear what you think. Phoebe, do you want to go first about what gives you some hope?
Yeah, definitely. As I say, so many young people across the world are experiencing eco-anxiety. I'm one of those young people, and I work with an organisation who focuses on that. So something that one of my colleagues, Kathleen, always says to me is that hope is a verb, and it's something that you have to practice, because it's so easy to not feel that hope and to feel that pessimism. So I'm constantly trying to practice hope. But things that definitely bring me that hope are young people across the world. Whenever I interact with young activists, I feel such a sense of joy and relief that the burden of addressing our climate crisis isn't just on me, and it's not just on this small bubble of people here and in the audience. It's there's huge swathes and movements of young people across the world that are doing incredible things. And for example, a year ago was the last time I was in this venue, and I came to watch the Greta Thunberg documentary, and I sobbed all the way through it. I was bawling my eyes out, couldn't stop crying, because of the relief that I felt. I felt relieved that I was seeing these movements of young people across the world doing incredible things. And it just fills my heart with warmth and joy when I see young people from as young as 3 and 4 talking about this now, all the way up to 70 and 80. So yeah, that's what's bringing me hope at the minute.
Judy?
Yeah, clearly I agree with all of that. As an older activist, what has given me hope over the last 2, 3, 4 years is the relative rush of involvement of young people all over the world in this movement. It's given it a completely new impetus. Greta Thunberg herself is a real heroine, of course, and the movement that has come out of it, she could never have dreamt of. And the other thing is that, just echoing, I think, what Evelyn said about how people in the Global South particularly are already experiencing climate change on an everyday basis. It's their life, it's not just something in the future. And on that basis, I want to mention COP26, and I don't really get hope from the prospect of the COP26 UN talks themselves, because I'm afraid that with, as I said earlier, with Boris Johnson in charge, and hypocrisy probably the most prominent note, lots of promises but no delivery. But what gives me hope is that we, for example, in the COP26 coalition in Manchester and all around the world actually, are planning protests and constant campaigning which will go on beyond the UN talks, where we really hope to be able to press for action and to involve people in the Global South as well, who on the whole won't be able to get to Glasgow because of poverty, because of COVID and other and immigration, racist immigration laws will mean many people who would like to go from the Global South, they can't. But we are having protests all over the world, and I think a large aspect of that is solidarity with the Global South and realising that we need to join together as one world to win this battle.
Definitely. And finally, Evelyn online, I don't know if you want to speak about what gives you hope at the moment. Can you hear us, Evelyn?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. So we're just speaking about what gives you hope as an activist.
What gives me hope today is seeing so many activists rising up to speak up for the people and the planet, seeing so many groups rising up to fight for the right thing, and seeing more collaboration from people around the world, seeing more collaboration of people in the Global South and the Global North. Like we already see Arctic Angels, a team that is working, a team that is so inclusive. It works with different groups of people, different age groups of people, and we are all working to achieve a common goal, and that is the protection of our global commons. So this really gives me hope, seeing different groups speaking up for the truth and speaking up for the people who cannot speak for themselves. Like in the Arctic, we see so many indigenous people living there, and they are losing their homes, they are losing their livelihoods, but we who don't live there are speaking up for them. So this gives me hope, and I believe that the more activists and the more people we have speaking up, the more we'll put more pressure on the world leaders to take climate action. And another thing that gives me hope is also seeing the older generation taking part in this, because initially we were only seeing mostly young people, but even the other groups of people are taking part in form of supporting the young people, in form of influencing leaders to take action.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I would just like to say, to echo from that, I've been working with Judy since the youth strike started, and she's sort of been the key person that's shown me how powerful intergenerational work is, because in the end, we are just young people and we are just getting started. And I think there's this real big expectation on us at the moment that we somehow have solutions. And people forget that even though we've got powerful voices and we've done really well to come together, that we don't know a lot. And Judy and older activists play such a key role in supporting young people and teaching them everything they've done, because you've had so many years of experience, which I've learned so much from. And it just goes to show that if anyone here takes anything from this, to engage with young people in the work that you do and the conversations that you have is so powerful. And there's this, I think, this big wall that me and Rabia were talking about earlier, where adults are scared to interact with young people because they think they're either not interested or they just don't think they'll understand them. And young people are scared to engage with adults because they don't feel qualified enough. And we end up in this bit of a rut. But I think when we get past that, that's when the most powerful action happens. And so if you take anything from this, it would be to do that and to interact with young people and to mix with all age groups. But going on from that, we're going to open up to audience questions if anyone has some. So do you want to bring the lights upon the audience if we can, and get some mics out? Does anyone have any questions to kickstart us off about absolutely anything?
I think there's someone at the back with their hands.
Oh, we have got someone in the very back corner.
And these questions are open to any of the panellists here.
Hi, thank you. My question is, in terms of global commons and how tied we are to the land because we don't fly and we actually eat food, is land reform a good focus in order to look at things from a root perspective and get a lot of these interlinked issues to kind of come together without focusing on all the issues too much, rather focusing on the root. Thanks.
No, that's a really good question. I think a lot of the time this is why we need climate justice, because in the end, kind of the climate crisis isn't just one issue. It affects absolutely everything. It links to sexism and racism and homophobia. And so that's a really good question. So does anyone want to take that about maybe how we tackle the root issue of climate justice and how multifaceted that is and how we can look at that?
Maria?
Maria, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, I think the first step is to recognize that climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable groups. And this comes from, historic reasons, right? So, for example, indigenous people, women, migrants are the most affected by the climate crisis. So we need to recognize this. We need to recognize that the climate crisis is also an unprecedented, or that will unprecedentedly affect human rights. And human rights must be at the center of climate action. We must put people up front, and as the SDGs slogan says, leave no one behind. So I think as citizens, what we can do is, recognize this, call for politicians and decision makers and big corporations to actually live up to their commitments and our expectations, because at the end, what's going on, or these commitments are the result of a livable planet, or are the line between a livable planet and a future for us and the future generations. So if I can mention something really relevant that is happening, the recent UNFCCC NDCs report, for those of you which don't know what are the NDCs, are the national climate commitments. So every country has the obligation to update or present new NDCs by last year, 2020. And what we know from this report is that we are way behind. We're going to an increase of 2.7 degrees of temperature by the end of the century, and this is really bad news. So we need to step up, and COP26, as one of the panelists mentioned, will be crucial to actually, raise ambition.
Thank you. Yes, a question in the middle here. Yeah,
green jacket.
Thank you. COP26 will have a lot of big finance people there. And I was very interested to hear an ex-oil magnate speaking last week. He's subsequently become the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he knows the value of taking money out of oil and putting it into renewables. And he's been speaking with other faith leaders like the Pope to say money has to move. So I'm just thinking, those young people who are studying economics at school and college, do you think there's a movement that you could help us push forward with young people to look at moving the money?
That's a great question. You might want to repeat this to Maria, but I feel like this is for you.
It is me. We just mentioned about kind of the movement of where money goes and how it's being invested in oil a lot, and maybe how that can go in the future. And for anybody who doesn't know, I'm taking A-level economics, which has been really interesting to do. And I mentioned at the opening panel that as part of that, I really wanted to look into capitalism. And obviously, it's the foundations that make our economy and the foundations that make our society. And so I was just interested to see what it was like and maybe learn about the alternatives. My economics teacher basically said that you can't do that. The government have mandated that kind of capitalism can't really be covered in the classroom. And for me, that was ridiculous, because I was like, the reason I want to take economics is to see how we can take the current kind of economic system we've got, whereas Judy said kind of capitalism and this consumerism is the problem that we've got and why we're getting to the point that we are. And so I fully agree that I think we need to start teaching young people about what is, but then also what could be, because there's so much power in education and about learning about the alternatives. And at the moment, I think we're doing young people a disservice by limiting their education and limiting what they can learn about just because we want to uphold the status quo that we've got. And Sir Tim Smith mentioned that as well, about sort of the the fact that people want to seem too political. And if somebody makes sort of a statement, it might be labelled a socialist, and then, oh, you can't do that because if a conservative makes a statement that isn't in line with their kind of political values, as the stereotype to be, that's then limiting us, and maybe those two binaries are actually a thing that are holding us back from making the progress that we need, because the climate crisis isn't a left-wing or a right-wing problem, it's a humanity problem. And I think maybe that's how we need to shift and look at it. So I fully agree, and I'm hopefully going to university soon, and I'd love to hopefully get out of that is learning about what is and what could be, and how young people, like we are on this panel today, can be a part of implementing that change that we need and being that change that forwards. But how that'll play out, I don't know, but hopefully I'll learn about it soon. So yeah, thank you for that question. Does anybody else have one? Oh, we've got one in the back corner there. Perfect.
Hi. What do you think we can do to engage more men with this? You'd be forgiven for thinking that, what can we do to engage more men? I've learned most of what I've learned. Well, yeah. I've learned most of what I've learned about the climate from my sister and my mother. I'm a vegan because my sister's a vegan. And it's very interesting being a vegan when you're a man and the reaction that gets versus being a vegan when you're a woman. Like, climate, it's a very gendered thing. Like, the architects of the Industrial Revolution here in Manchester were white men. The damage that's done to this planet is an aspect of patriarchy, and yet it's women that are engaging with it. How do we change that?
Yeah.
So Evelyn and Maria, the question was around what can we do to engage more men in the climate conversation. So it's open to all panelists if anyone wants to answer this. Evelyn?
I think we have so many activists, we have so many men fighting for climate justice, and I believe that we are on this as women right now because women are among the groups which are most affected by the climate crisis, and of course we have to speak up. We have to speak up for the women who cannot speak up for themselves, and we have to let the world know how much the climate crisis is affecting the women and how much power the women have, because women are already marginalized in their communities. But we don't mean that the men cannot join the climate movement. You are welcome. You can actually start. You can start by speaking up for the women. You can join by supporting what we do, support our work, speak up, and join different groups, join different groups around the world, like Fridays for Future, Rise Up Movement. There's so many groups. There's so many activism groups. Yeah. I understand that some groups that are only feminine based, but you could still support us by amplifying our stories.
Thank you.
Like Judy, I'm a long-term activist, and I think your Stop Screwing Up Our Future needs to go back a step and actually look at how we got here today. One of the things I feel really strongly about is, all right, climate change, right? It's happening, it's already happening, it's now. But I also know that there has been such a thing as climate control. And in the 1940s, controlling the weather was a major thing for the US government. And that's been continuing. It was used at the end of the Vietnam War when the US troops moved out to destroy the crops. Now, any country that has the power to control the weather in any way, and I do believe in the butterfly effect, so when something happens in, say, Africa, the ripple effect, like it did in Chernobyl, like it did, the bombs that have, in the wars that we've had, the chemicals that are released, this all impacts, doesn't it, And I think that is kept very quiet about the weather control. We like to think, well, maybe it could be used in a positive way. But who knows? I'd like your opinions on that.
I'll say something.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's a good point, Eve, and I know that in Vietnam, the Americans definitely did what they could do to control the weather. They ceded the clouds to rain when they wanted it to benefit their campaigns. But much good it did them, I'm very glad to say, in the end. I think in the present situation, the ideas for controlling the weather and the climate, and in particular, I suppose this is not exactly the same, but the idea of extracting CO2 from the air in order to be able to reduce the amount of CO2 in the air without having to so drastically reduce the amount that our industry is producing. That is a thoroughly bad idea. That's not going to work. No technology is going to work like that, or if it did, it would be too scary and unpredictable in its consequences, and we should reject it. The only kind of, if you like, manipulation of this matter, apart from simply reducing the use of fossil fuels, is to protect the forests, to protect the Amazon and the other and the peat bogs in this country, and restore nature as far as we can. And that's the only benign way in which we should try to influence what happens. And that's something that George Monbiot, for example, writes about a lot. And I think that's really important. And we need to do that. But we also, of course, need to stop the use of fossil fuels. Tomorrow would be a good day to do that.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you to the audience for asking those questions. I'll just take one quick question, and then this will be the last one, and then I'll ask a quick fire round question to the panelists, and we'll finish the conversation there.
Thanks very much. I was wondering to what extent the panel thinks that we could change people's idea of appropriate transportation to take to different locations. So rather than taking cars that burn fossil fuels, cycle. Rather than taking airplanes, which is a huge polluter, take a boat to wherever you need to go. Same as Greta Thunberg when she went to the UN. So what extent do you think people can be convinced to do that?
Yeah, so just for the people on video, the question was around public transport and how can we get more people to switch to sustainable alternatives. So instead of flying, you could take a boat, using obviously buses and more mass forms of public transport rather than private cars. Does anyone want to take that? Yeah, do you want to take it, Phoebe?
Yeah, I think that it comes from a fundamental change in our mindsets and the infrastructure that underpins all those things. And as Judy said, the capitalist society that we live in, where it's all about driving to the office to get on the grind and earn all the money, and we don't value, I think that we don't value journeys for journey's sake. We're always trying to get from A to B. We're not enjoying our lives as they are. So for example, I love cycling now, I never used to, because I actually love the journey. But I think that the infrastructure needs to be there from the policymakers, for example, the cycle lanes, the flexible working from home, more accessible options, for example, boats can be super expensive, or they can take really long, and if you've only got a certain amount of annual leave, that kind of thing, it's just not practical. So we actually need a rethink of the systems which underpin all of society, but in this example, our transport systems as well.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. And just to end with this final question, so I just want one answer from each panelist. So what existing solutions are there that we could be helping to develop or grow towards the climate crisis now? So I'll start with Maria, move on to Evelyn, and then Judy, and end with Phoebe, if that's okay. Maria, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Well, scientists have been very clear, and the solutions to tackle climate change are already there. And mostly we can find them in nature. So it's key to protect and preserve key ecosystems that are so relevant for maintaining the global, balance. For example, the Arctic, the Amazon, because if we don't, we will reach tipping points. So I want to reiterate on the 10-year moratorium to protect the Arctic from exploitation and invasive activities. I want to reiterate as well And this is an initiative that is aligned with what I just mentioned, is the 30% by 2030 initiative to protect 30% of the world's surface. It's just been approved in motion in the IUCN Congress. So basically, these two, I think, are very important.
Thank you, Maria. Evelyn?
I would like to encourage people to work together globally and get to an understanding that we are all global citizens. People can start by uniting with groups like Arctic Angels, a group that is intergenerational and very inclusive, and it's collaborating to achieve climate justice. And if you would like to join the Arctic Angels, you can visit us at globalchoices.org, and you're welcome to join the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. Judy?
Okay, so I think just like to also reiterate something, and that is that we are looking forward to the COP26 talks, and it's imperative, I think, that we do all get as active as we can around that and recognise that they will not be coming forward with solutions which are on the scale and at the speed that we need, but that if we join, there are other organisations as well, but I'm involved with the COP26 Coalition, and we have a hub in Manchester, and we're planning a march, a demonstration on the 6th of November, which is the Saturday in the middle of the COP talks, and there will be demonstrations all around the world on that day. Some people from Manchester will be going to Glasgow, that's important too, but I would appeal to everybody who's here, if you possibly can, to come and join us on the 6th of November, and also, I believe, Emma will correct me if I'm wrong, that the youth strikers globally, again, are planning to have a strike the day before that, on November the 5th, that's an easy date to remember, and they are hoping to get a lot of workplace actions, a lot of strikes on that occasion as well. And if you're in a position to, in a workplace where you can, at the very least, come out and do a meeting at lunchtime or have a photo op, or if you can, to come down to St. Peter's Square on Friday the 5th of November at lunchtime, then that is a very concrete thing we can all do in the next couple of months. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. And lastly, Phoebe?
I'd say if you are a decision maker in the audience, you need to be facilitating young people and those most vulnerable in society within your climate action decisions. And if you are a young person or someone who is most vulnerable in society, I'd say find your community, join whatever movements you can, whether it be Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, SOS UK, Force of Nature, who I work with. Join your community and find those folks around you who are like-minded and will fill you with that warmth and that joy that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Thank you so much to the audience, for everyone who joined. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Judy, Phoebe, and Emma. Yeah, thank you. We hope that was inspirational in a way for you guys. I definitely feel inspired and have taken lots away from yourselves. And please keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much.